as we continue to talk about history. And as last week we talked about, to every book there is a preface to get started. And in every book, the preface gives you a glimpse. It gives you a sense of where the story is going, of what the book is about. And I encourage you guys that many of us have jumped into stories, have jumped into chapters, have jumped into books and did not understand the nature of the book, the reason for the book, the type of book it was. And so somebody jumped into drama, somebody jumped into action, somebody jumped into a book where there was trauma going on and there was all this stuff happening. And so many of us are living stories. I call it life scripts. Many of us were born into other people's books, and you found yourself being a character of that book and don't understand why certain things have happened the way that they happened. But you didn't realize that that was some of the, you just came into a chapter of somebody else's book that was being written, of somebody else's story. And my God, you went with what the storyline was. You went with the drama. You went with the plot. You went with the suspense. You went with the thrill. You went with the adventure. You went through some of the dry places and all of that. But there comes a time when everybody has to stop and say, but wait a minute, am I living somebody else's story? Am I a character in somebody else's book? And that book just might be something of their story, but it's not needing to be your story. Today, I want to encourage you as we go through this second part of 2021 that God has spoken to me and he's informed me that everybody that's living, you have a story. You have a book in you. Your life literally is a book. And what are people reading when they read your story? You cannot go off of what somebody else's book was. Maybe you was a character in that book, but you can't continue to live in the sagas of that book. You got to now start writing your own story. So I want to encourage somebody, just like what you heard Gabby said, she's writing a book. What book are you writing? What book have you written? What book are you in the midst of writing? And I want to encourage you that if you have a lot of drama in your story, a lot of trauma in your story, if you're a victim in your story, if your story has a lot of stuff that's dealing with feelings and emotions and brokenness and despair and all of that, could I tell you, hold up for a moment? Because that should not just be the end all and be all of your book, of your story. I want to challenge you that every book that is written, somewhere God should be in the book. Matter of fact, if God ain't in the book, could I say to you, maybe you need to write a different book, because I want to encourage you this morning that every book should have God in it, because it's God that started your book. Oh, that's good right there. So if you didn't catch last week, jump on and watch the YouTube. Watch it again. Maybe it's something you got to read and listen to again and take some notes, because every book starts with a title. It starts with the preface, and then it jumps into the next thing is the table of contents. And so today I want to talk a little bit about, for these next few moments that I have with you, talk with you about the table of contents, because somebody has judged your book by its title. Somebody has looked at the preface or failed to look at the preface to understand what your book is really about. Or maybe you've looked at somebody else's title and judged them, and they could be the very thing to your breakthrough. Good God, who am I talking to? Throw up some comments so I can see who's getting this morning. Maybe you looked at the cover and you judged the cover without getting deep into the book. See, sometimes the title has to kind of be dramatic. It has to kind of get your attention. Could somebody's cover gotten your attention, but when you started reading their book, they weren't all what the cover of the title was about? Maybe the cover of the book title had some stuff that misaligned what the book was really all about. Maybe they judged you based on the cover, the title, but really didn't take time to look deep into what the story was about. Who am I talking to this morning? Kiki, I see your comments, but my God, to every saga woo, you got to put the right title to the cover. And so what I'm beginning to do, when I was in college and now any book that I pick up, I first start with the preface, because the preface will give me an idea of where the book is going. And at that moment is when I can decide, do I keep reading or do I put the book down? Sometimes I've put the book down only to see that sometimes I may not be ready for it. Somebody, you may not be ready for that book yet. Somebody wants marriage, but you may not be ready for that book yet. Somebody want to be a millionaire, but you might not be ready for what that's going to take for that book yet. Do you hear me? I said yet. Somebody may be struggling, wanting kids and wanting all of these things, but maybe you are not at that book yet. So I want to challenge somebody, because maybe you are, maybe you aren't. This is where I'm hoping that the Holy Spirit, as God has given me this straight off the cuff, that you could begin to take and analyze. When you read the preface of your story, when you read the preface of somebody else's book, are you ready to pick that book up? Because you cannot afford to get into somebody's book and they ain't ready for what you got. That you get into somebody's story and what you bringing, they may not be ready for. Or it just might be time that as you read the preface, that now you can say, now I could weave some chapters in and we could begin to have some dialogue and share this experience called life together. Or maybe in your preface, everything's been drama. Baby mama drama, spiritual drama, emotional drama, psychological drama, drama of the past. And you're reading the preface like Kiki, what you just did. You're reading the preface, and when you look back and you start looking over what the story's about, there's woes, there's setbacks, there's disappointments, there's fears, there's anger, there's emotional stuff, there's some abuse, there's some neglect, there's all of this stuff in the preface. But that's where to every book that you write, there are some punctuations that you can add. You can add a comma. You can add an exclamation point. You can add semicolons. And matter of fact, you could also put some periods to say that's going to stop right there. And when it stops right there, then you can continue on to the next story of the chapter. And so keep it going right there. And so as we move from the preface should kind of determine where you're going. Could I challenge somebody, let the preface going further this year determine your steps. For God is in your preface. If you read the lines deep enough, you'll find, just look for God. What is God saying? Where is God taking you? Just look back. Before you even read the book, look back to see what books were you in prior. To see how the story was told, to see how you worked in somebody else's book. Maybe it was your parents' book. Maybe it was your grandparents. Maybe you could talk about where you came from. Maybe you was an immigrant. Maybe you came to another country. Maybe you had to deal with some things in somebody else's book. And you could look back and say, my God, I got over. My God, this is, sometimes you got to look back at other people's books in your life to determine what your preface is going to look like. What God is saying, where God is in it. And so as we continue this, let that be your beginning. And as you continue the story, the next thing that you find in a book is you find the table of contents. See, I'm looking and I see that even the Bible has a table of contents. It lets you know where you're going. It lets you know Genesis in the beginning. It lets you know Exodus, that there is a way out. It lets you know what Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. It lets you know that there's some standards that if you're gonna read, you gotta live by. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. It lets you know that if you mess up, Deuteronomy means the second law, the second time, it shows you a glimpse of how God can, he doesn't throw you away, but there's some second chances even to God. So see, even I just got that from the table of contents. I want to talk to you this morning for these brief couple of moments, and I see so many joining in and so many comments. And Susan, thank you for the comments. Josh, thank you. Grab a pen. Let's continue our discussion. And somebody, I want to hear from you next week as you dive into what God is saying. So the table of contents, let's look at that for a moment. For the table of contents gives users an overview of the documents or the content or the organization of the book. It allows the reader to go directly to a specific chapter. Or when you read in the table of contents, it gives you a glimpse of where the story might be going. I want to talk to somebody because when I think of the table of contents, if I was to spiritualize it, I would just say sometimes the table of contents can be like a prophetic word. That God gives you a prophetic word and you don't have all the details of what he's giving you, but he's giving you the table of contents of where you're about to go. That's what the table of contents is like. It's like giving you a gist. It's giving you a kind of flow. It's giving you some type of organization of where this might be going. And so I want to encourage somebody because the table of contents, I want you to read it because sometimes we can assume something to be something that it might not be. Sometimes we may read the table of contents and judge a thing based on the content of what the title is, of what the subtitle is, without really understanding the depthness of the thing. And so some of us have counted ourselves out. Some of us have self-sabotaged the story. Some of us have read the title and said, nope, that's too big. That's overwhelming. That's too much. Some of us have gotten to the title, to the table of contents, and what we're reading may cause us to feel like it's boring. It may feel overwhelming. I don't know. But what do you do when you come to the table of contents? Maybe you read the contents and it seems like there's too many chapters. You may look at how many pages, hundreds of pages, and you look at it and you put the book aside. I'm looking at this book right here. Look at how thick it is. And so I may start with the very beginning and see that, oh my God, it's over 1,500 pages, and I just might get overwhelmed and put the book aside, not realizing that if I just start in the beginning, start somewhere that I could maybe get through. And if I just start with one content of it may cause me to keep reading. Woo! What do you do? Tell me, what do you do when you get to the table of content? I'm asking you, put it in the comment section. But let me share with you something, because sometimes the table of contents might just be misleading. Turn with me to 1 Samuel 16. 1 Samuel 16, when you got to just say amen, somebody. 1 Samuel 16 verse 6 says, second instrumental, when they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointing stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Jesse called Abinadab and presented him to Samuel in verse 8 and said, the Lord hasn't chosen this one either. Then Jesse presented Shammah, but Samuel said, the Lord hasn't chosen him either. After Jesse presented seven of his sons, they passed by before Samuel. But Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So he asked Jesse, are all these your sons that you have? See, sometimes in the table of contents, they may leave out some stuff. Woo! Sometimes in the table of contents, everything may not be detailed. In the table of contents, you may not have the full story. And if Samuel would have just went off of the table of content, he would have misjudged, he would have misaligned, he would have misunderstood what God was saying. But Samuel had some sense that this is more than what the content of what the table of contents says. Because if it was left up to Jesse, Jesse had a table of contents that left out one of his sons. Good God, who am I talking to? Because in your life script, in your family, in your job, in your church even, in some relationships, somebody has left you out of the table of contents. Woo, that's straight off the cuff. Somebody did not align your character right. Somebody forgot about you. Somebody left you half dead. Somebody, when they was asking for all the details, they forgot to tell about your content. They forgot to tell you about your story. And so here it is. Just my God forgot his own son, his blood. What do you do when the one you think should have your back, the one you think should fight for you, the one who you think should raise you, the one who you think should have took care of you, the one you think should have looked out for you, forgot about you, dropped you, left you, did not put you in their table of content? Well, let me help you. Let me help somebody. Let me help you. Let me help you. Just because you're not in their table of contents, I want to share with somebody. I want to tell somebody this morning that that's why the preface is important. That's why the table of contents is important, because sometimes the table of contents does not give all the details. But oh my God, I want to say to you, read the chapter anyway. What does the chapter say? Let's read it. Let's read it. Oh, this is getting good. So David answered. Whew, wait a minute. I left the page. Come on, what happened? Whew, verse 10. After Jesse, see, Samuel had to challenge him. Sometimes you got to challenge the details. You got to challenge what you see. You just can't go off of what the title says. Sometimes you got to challenge. It's going to get rough. It's going to get ugly. It may be challenging, but Samuel challenged Jesse and said, is there another? So Jesse presented 7 of his sons. The Lord said, these are not who I have chosen. So Samuel asked him, are these all your sons you have? And Jesse said, but this still is the youngest. But right now, he's tending the sheep. Samuel told Jesse, send for him. We won't sit down till we eat until he gets here. So Jesse sent for him, and he had beautiful eyes, healthy, handsome, like me, appearance. When you've been forgotten, don't let your handsomeness, don't let your beauty get ugly. When they talk about you, when they drag you, when they have you doing some mundane things, don't let your character be maligned just because somebody's table of contents don't have you in it, just because they won't mention your name, just because they have beef with you. The writer said it wasn't even the father. The writer had to make comments. Sometimes other people see your beauty, see what's in you, see how God's created you, will give you a pat on the back when somebody so closest to you may not even have any comments to say. The matter of fact, the ones closest to you may have called you and labeled your own book, put a title on your book that they had no right to put the title to. But my God, sometimes it'll take others. It'll take God to choose others to see something in you that others don't even see. And they live with you. They may be around you 24/7. They may call you their friends. They may call you their BFFs. They may be the ones who you think got your back, but could I help somebody right now to free you up? It may be the least one you expect. It might be the one that you don't even know their name. You don't even know where they've come from. For them to point you out, for them to say you're the chosen one, for them to say you're the one. Now it's time for you to start writing your book. And my God, when David got there, Samuel started calling, started speaking prophetically who he was. If David didn't see himself as handsome, well, the prophetic word over his life was, you are handsome. Your appearance, it looks great. But I believe, because we saw just in a couple of verses before that Samuel wasn't really talking. He may have been talking about the physical, but Samuel saw something deep. He saw the prophetic word over David's life, and he spoke what he heard God say, what he heard God saw. And he said, my God, you look handsome. Your appearance is one of stature, of greatness. And so Samuel anointed David. Now, if I read the content of what it has in here, if I read it in chapter 17, the table of contents says David versus Goliath. If I go back a chapter before 16, it speaks of how Saul was rejected. And so, see, what am I saying? You can read a table of content, but you might not just get the depthness. You might not get the full understanding. And many of us are judging people, have maligned people, have sized folks up, have gotten into church and looked at people and said, who do they think they are? Have messed up business deals, have messed up relationships, have messed up stuff because you are reading, or you put a table of content to something that you have judged before you started reading the depthness of the book. God had to say to Samuel, listen, I am not looking at the outward appearance, but I am looking at the heart. Because if Samuel would have went with the outward appearance, he would have judged wrong. He would have chosen wrong. He would have done wrong. But my God, when you start going deep into the context, deep into the details, my God, the table of content might not give you the full details of what the situation is, of what it's like, of what you got to go through, of what you got to deal with. But my God, I want to challenge you. The table of content will either help you or it will hurt you from where God is trying to take you. How will it help you? Because sometimes the content is a prophetic word for where you're going. So sometimes if God gave you all the details, David, you wouldn't allow yourself to be anointed. If David knew that in the next chapter that the table of content would change, David may not have allowed that table of content that says Samuel anoints David. See, we could look at one table of content and shout, woo, I'm blessed, I'm healed, thank you, Jesus. So, see, that's a table of content where we can shout. But what do you do when in the same book, the table of content might have a challenge for you? The table of content might look ugly. The table of content may cause your character to might look a little crazy. The table of content might cause somebody to misalign who you really are. If they went further with David's table of content, somebody would have judged him and said, do you know who he is? He's a lust person. Do you know who he is? He's a murderer. Do you know who he is? He's a thief. Do you know who he is? He's one that was insane. Do you know who he is? He's one that kind of seemed like, don't got it all together. Do you know who he is? He was one that got naked and danced when the covenant of the ark was coming in, and his wife even had to criticize. Do you know? See, sometimes the table of content is not always going to look rosy. The table of content may not always look victorious. The table of content may not always be rosy and victor. But could I say, the table of content has to have balance. You have to have good times. You have to have content where it looks crazy. You have to have content where it looks questionable. And you have to have content in your life where you don't know how things are going to make it. You have to have content where there's health issues, financial issues, relational issues, spiritual issues. Oh, that's what makes it a book. But could I say to somebody, look at the content of your life and stop judging the book just by the cover, because to every cover there is some content that you can glean from, get from, learn from, grow from, see the blessing in, see the joy, see the failure, see the setback, see the hurt, see the pain. That's what makes it a good book. So here it is. The content of this book did not stop. Third, did not stop Samuel from anointing David king. That was part of the book's content. But then David to continue in the book that God was setting him up for. And so let me just help you. That the table of contents is something, as you're reading the content, it's preparing you for what's to come. It's preparing you to do it again. It's preparing you for where you are going. It's preparing you for what's next. And so could I challenge you? Start looking before you start reading the book. Analyze and judge the table of contents. Because to each chapter, there's content. To each chapter, there's detail. To each chapter, there is something in it for you. For each chapter has its own. Each chapter has its own content. Could I say to you, don't allow some content that you ain't ready for to try to live that content before it's time. Could I help somebody else? The content that you read, that chapter in your life, that table of content is over. That was content, that was chapter 2 within the content of the book. You in chapter 5 now, baby. Don't go back to chapter 2. You lived that title already. It's time for you to live the chapter where that content in 5 might say different. What if David would have tried to stay in chapter 16's content? Then he would have just stayed anointed and done nothing with it. I heard a word from God. I'm trying to get out of here, y'all. Some of y'all been anointed in that chapter. You got the content in that chapter, but now what God's giving you in that chapter, you ain't doing nothing with it for you to get to the next chapter. He gave you the anointing in 16 so that you could be ready for 17. But my God, if you stay in the content of 16, you'll never get to what God gave you in 16 to get you to 17. 17, it had to take David to start fighting, to start acting, to start doing something. And what am I saying? Oh, I feel a preaching spirit coming up on me because I gotta go. But what am I saying? You gotta work your content, baby. You gotta get in a new content, new chapter of your book. And what you got in 16 of that content, it's now time to go to a new content, chapter 17. PC here. Thanks for watching this video. Here's another video, and make sure you subscribe, like, and comment down below. Give on Givelify, type in Life Change Christian Church. Also tune in Facebook at Life Change Providence. We'll see you there.